Biden administration brokered a $6 billion deal to exchange Iranian prisoners for 5 Americans jailed there. First reported by the New York Times on Thursday, the swap hasn't happened yet, but the agreement between the U.S. and Iran comes after 2 years of quiet negotiations.
National Security Council spokesperson John Kirby talked to CNN's Jake Tapper about the deal. Let's see what he had to say.
There's not going to be a ransom payment. There's not going to be sanctions relief. There's no U.S. taxpayer dollars that are going to be applied to getting these Americans home. And this $6 billion, without getting into the details of the negotiations, I think there's a little confusion about what this account is all about. This is part of a system of accounts that were set up in the previous administration that allowed some countries to import Iranian goods, non-sanctionable goods, and that the Iranians could pull on those accounts, those payments, through a special system only used for humanitarian purposes. And that's what we're talking about here.
Here to break down more on the negotiations is Dr. Trita Parsi, the co-founder and executive vice president of the Quincy Institute for Responsible Statecraft. Now, Dr. Parsi, I always welcome American hostages coming home, but $6 billion is a lot of money. And according to the top advisor to Iran's negotiating team, they can spend this money however they want. What do you make of this deal?
Well, first of all, the Iranians may say some of these things because of their own domestic political reasons, does not mean, however, that it is true. It's also extremely important to note this is Iran's own money. This is not American money that is going to Iran in order to essentially pay for the release of these wrongfully imprisoned Americans. Rather, this is Iran's own money that has been frozen, and it is unfrozen and goes back to Iran, as well as some Iranian prisoners in the United States. That is a prisoner exchange. The Trump administration has done those as well as previous administrations have done. And I think at the end of the day, when Americans are coming home who have been wrongfully detained, I mean, this is essentially hostages, that is something that should be deeply welcomed.
How much are the tensions between the U.S. and Iran today shaped by the coup of Mossadegh some years ago?
Well, the coup of Mossadegh, which we're inching closer to the 70-year anniversary of it, is when the United States, together with the Brits, the CIA, and MI5, conspired and got rid of Iran's domestically elected prime minister in an embryonic stage of Iran's democracy and reinstated the Shah. This was a huge mistake by the United States. It set back Iran as it was moving towards a more democratic situation. And we're paying the price for it till today, because this is something that the Iranians are deeply aware of. Most Americans have probably never, ever heard of it. But bottom line is that this really set the stage for the U.S. and Iran to increasingly move towards becoming enemies rather than being allies and friends as they were earlier on. But it does not explain, of course, everything that is happening between the United States and Iran.
Is there any concern that a deal of this nature could incentivize future kidnappings or hostage-taking of Americans? How do we make sure that freeing up this $6 billion doesn't show Iran that kidnapping Americans is a profitable industry?
Well, research has been done on this extensively. Some countries have a policy of not doing prisoner exchanges, et cetera. And bottom line is, doesn't make a difference. It's not what actually is motivating this type of hostage taking. What is, unfortunately, is the sad state of relations between the United States and Iran. If the relations were in a much better stage, these things would not be happening. So if we truly want to bring Americans home and end this, then we have to make a more profound effort to see what can we do to advance U.S. interests while at the same time reduce tensions with Iran, lowering those tensions and improving the relationship. That doesn't mean that the United States should have a friendship or alliance with the Iranians. There's many, many policies that are highly problematic that the Iranians are pursuing. But the degree to which this relationship is so bad and so tense is unnecessary and lies in the interest of both countries to move it away from that state. And once that is done, I think that many of these issues that are symptoms of the problem rather than the roots of the problem will more or less go away by themselves.
How much of American foreign policy making would you say is shaped by this approach that I think we take with Iran quite often, which is a tough approach to take? America is a relatively young nation, has been around hundreds of years, whereas the society in Iran has been around for thousands of years. And so we take this kind of approach where if a state like Iran doesn't have a favorable view of the United States for whatever reason, given our history of intervention there, or just isn't sympathetic towards American global economic interests and won't cooperate with us, that suddenly, if they don't want to bend to our interests, they're then labeled a hostile state. How much would you say that that leads to a situation where now we have other countries, okay, well, if you're going to categorize us as hostile and influence how much we can participate in the global economy, then we make them become hostile because of this approach. Would you say that that's a fair categorization of foreign policy as it relates to Iran in the past half a century?
I think you're putting your finger on something that is important, which is that our policies have also contributed to this issue. And on the larger scale, when you're thinking about this, if you take a look at the debate in the United States back in the 1990s, when the U.S. first was starting to really sanction Iran, there was arguments made back then that said, if we're going to treat Iran like a pariah, at a moment in which the Iranians actually were trying to improve relations with the U.S., and sanction and isolate them, all we're going to do is to push Iran closer to China and Russia. Fast forward 25 years, and that prediction was absolutely true. And in fact, when we're seeing the Iranians right now supporting Russia and Ukraine with the drones, even U.S. officials that I've spoken to are of the view that had we never pulled out of the JCPOA, had we had that functioning nuclear program still in place and had moved forward to improve and reduce tensions in other areas, then we would not be seeing the Iranians provide that type of support to the Russians, because their incentive structure would have been quite different from what it is today.
Dr. Parsi, do we have more information on the background of the individuals who are potentially being released under this deal?
Are you talking about the Iranian individuals released by the United States?
And vice versa.
Well, when it comes to the Americans, we know quite a lot about 3 of them. 2 of them remain unnamed. When it comes to the Iranians that are being released, we know next to nothing about them. Their names have not been in the media. If it follows previous patterns, most likely these are individuals who have been detained and imprisoned in the United States for sanctions violations. Sanctions that the Iranians believe are completely illegitimate, and as a result, viewed the imprisonment of those people to be wrongful as well.
So what do you make of this deal, given the growing tensions of relationships between Iran and China, or Iran and Russia, especially the shakeup after Ukraine, and whether or not the United States and European countries would still continue to use and purchase Russian oil? This shook things up as far as our relations go abroad. The United States has been pretty wary of Iran working with China or Russia at all, but it seems we forced them into a position where they sort of have to. But what does a deal like this mean? Do you think there was any sort of negotiation along the lines of limiting their relationship with China and Russia?
I don't believe so. I think this deal has the potential to set the stage, create momentum for further diplomacy that could address other areas of tension, such as the nuclear issue, and by that reduce Iran's reliance on Russia and China, as well as their gravitation in that direction. I'm not certain, however, as to whether the Iranians or the Biden administration is going to take advantage of this momentum that has been created through this deal, because of political calculations and political factors at home in both capitals. Right now, if you take a look at this prisoner exchange, the administration is already taking some heat for having done this prisoner exchange. Well, just imagine the heat they would be taking for striking a new nuclear deal with Iran right before the presidential campaign is about to start. So I think those political factors are probably going to lead to both capitals not capitalizing on the momentum that this prisoner swap can actually create.
Thank you, Dr. Parsi, so much for joining us to get some more details on this new deal that's just been reported. More rising after this.
Thank you so much.